For the last 3 years, biology has been among the most failed subjects at O&A level, yet it is a vital subject in the health sector. Having realized this concern, I opened up a YouTube channel which I identified as Easy Science International to assist both O&A level students understand biology better, with an aim of elucidating passion for science among learners, especially in this trying moment of COVID-19.
Hello everyone, welcome to Easy Science International. This is yet another tutorial, and the topic we are going to be handling today is genetics. A great thanks to our audience in Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, and the United States of America. We also pray for this pandemic to calm down and we resume with normal life. In our first tutorial, that is Introduction to O-Level Genetics, we looked at the definition of terms which are found in this topic, and we defined a number of terms like the gene, the term itself, genetics and inheritance, among other terms. And I remember we left an exercise, and it is very important for our tutorial today to at least attempt a few definitions in that exercise. So that is mutation and mutagen. A mutation is a sudden change in the genetic makeup of an organism. At times it is referred to as spontaneous. You can substitute the word spontaneous for sudden. Whereas mutagens, these are agents which cause mutations. For example, they can be radiations, they can be chemicals, among other agents. So basically that's what we looked at last time. I'm very glad. Before we go into and we dig deep into today's topic, let me take this opportunity to unleash our partnership with Let's Educate Uganda. Let's Educate Uganda is doing a great job in partnership with Easy Science International in order to make you served amidst these trying moments. We are reaching out to you. On that note, I also thank all those people who are recommending our content to friends, relatives, among others. So our topic today, we are going to dig deep into what we call variations. Now, as we are studying genetics, we studied 2 terms. Last time we looked at 2 terms among the rest. That was genotype and phenotype. And we saw that the phenotype is the outward appearance of an organism as determined by the genetic makeup, that is the genotype. So before we dissect or go deep into the genotypes and the genes, study of genes, how they combine to form different combinations of genes that determine the phenotypes, we need to understand the outward appearances, the traits, the characteristics which come up as a result of the combinations of these genes. And from the phenotype, we see that there is a term called variation. Let's go and look at variation. Yes. Have you ever wondered why even your closest blood sister or brother, you can't resemble 100%? Have you ever wondered why you have differences? You might find somebody is brown, the other one is chocolate, the other one is maroon. But they are from the same parents. That is a phenomenon known as variation. And we can only study it under genetics. Then we can take this recap. In our last tutorial, we looked at these terms, genetics and inheritance. And we saw that genetics is the study of heredity and variation among organisms. So we are on the right track. We are going to find out why do organisms who are from the same parents have distinct, or actually they vary in some characteristics or traits. Somebody might be having a dimple, whereas the other one is not having. So, but they are all brothers or sisters, brothers and sisters. Now, we also saw that heredity deals with the similarities. This is a study which helps us to describe how the similarities arise among organisms. For instance, how does it come to pass that you resemble one or two of your parents, or you resemble your great paternal or maternal grandfather or grandmother? Step root is a Science International as we dissect deep into the phenomenon known as variation. So we shall start with a question. And this question goes, describe the categories of variation. Now we are going to describe the categories of variation. Now this question is 2 in 1. The first attempt is to give the categories of variation, and then we go deep and describe them. When they ask you to describe something, you need to tell us the details of that object you're trying to describe. Now, if it is a phenomenon, how do you bring out the details? You describe using illustrations, diagrams, on top of the definition and explanations you give. Now, in our case today, this is a phenomenon. It is a term in genetics known as variation. So, the two categories of variation are continuous variation and discontinuous variation. So, what is continuous variation? Now, we are starting to describe. We are going to first give a definition, give some good information about it, any other relevant information we know about it. Then we illustrate. Here we shan't illustrate with the diagram being a phenomenon, but we shall illustrate with some, maybe it could be a graph, we shall find out, or it would be a pie chart, who knows. So let's go. Continuous variation. What is that term referring to? What is continuous variation? Now, as the word continuous means something to proceed, smoothly proceed. And when you coin it with variation, variations are just changes in traits. We are looking at traits and we are looking at the phenotypes, the outward appearances. Why do we have differences? Per se, you don't totally resemble your parent. Yes, even your brother, you might not do the same combination at A level. Or you might not be having the same hobbies. Those are variations. We are all humans, but different. Many people use this analogy of the hand, where you find that this finger is shorter than this one like is shorter than this one, yet this one is also shorter than this one. as you proceed to the index. So we are different, but in the same environment. Now, we want to see really how different are the variations, how can we categorize them, and how can we better understand these variations. We are still on what we call continuous variation definition. Now, we are going to generate our definition from the characteristics of this phenomenon called continuous variation. Now, in continuous variation, there is a gradual change. That is the first characteristic. And also, in continuous variation, organisms do not show clear-cut differences. So, another one is, that is, they do not show clear-cut differences between the two extremes. Now, if we are to consider a trait that can be intelligence, you find that when I give you a paper of biology to answer, when I assess you and bring back the papers, I expect to be having the best performer and the worst performer. So me having those two, it just defines our extremes. The first extreme is the best performer and the other extreme is the worst performer. Now, we are seeing that for continuous variation, there is a gradual change. So when I'm giving you papers, you will be, there is that state of Kwangamaya which you go into. I mean, you be perplexed, your hearts are pumping when you don't receive your paper fast when I start with the best performer. Or when I'm to start with the worst performer, everybody's heart will be high and the pressure high, waiting to see, am I next or am I the best performer if the class is a class of 50 students. So you find that among the 50 students, not all of them will be worst performers. There will be the best and the worst performer, but there will be a transition from the worst performer to the best. So I'll give a paper, somebody scores 1%, can't give a 0. Another one scores 5, find somebody with an 80. Then the best can be with 101%. If that is not applicable, you do a paper out of 100. So the best can be with a 98. Now, between the one of 1% and the other one who scored 98%, there are people between here who scored 80, 70, 60. So there is a transition from 1 up to 98, gradual change. And we are saying that the organisms do not show clear-cut differences. This one we shall understand it better when we look at discontinuous variation. For if an organism is, if we've used the performance or intelligence, now let us use another character. Oh, sorry, another trait. That can be tallness. In a community, you won't have a fixed height for the tallest people and a fixed height for the shortest people in that community if you were to sample. I mean, to pick out a few people and measure their heights. You find that one who is the tallest will be with 6 meters per se, maybe. Then the shortest with 2 meters of height. Then you find that not all individuals will measure 2 meters in that community who are short, and those who are tallest those who are told to measure 6 meters. There will be other individuals in between. Some people call them the mediocres, the asoras. They will be there. Somebody is not short, again is not tall. So here we are seeing another characteristic that in continuous variation, they are what we call intermediates, in between. The people who are between the one who is the tallest and the one who is the shortest. Therefore, there won't be a clear-cut difference that in this community there are only 2 8s, 6 meters and 2 meters only. You find 2.1, 2.3, 2.4 as you proceed in a given sample. And at last, the extremes. We've looked at the extremes. So in between extremes, you expect to find other people. Therefore, to coin our definition, a continuous variation is the type of variation where there is a gradual change and organisms do not show clear-cut differences between the 2 extremes of the trait. We've just combined the characteristics of this kind of variation. Variation is just I can call them the differences brought about due to trait. Now, we know that because there are gradual changes from the first extreme to the last extreme, we shall create intermediates, people who lie in between them. So that is another characteristic. Now, what are the examples of continuous variation?